Hello and welcome to Cheshire Audio. Now, today I'm going to be in the workshop, and what I'm going to do actually is, I don't know if you've sort of seen it, the very, very early videos I did. I did 3 videos, and this was the original purpose of the YouTube channel, was just for these 3 videos, because I got a lot of phone calls from people who'd had early Rega Planars, 2s and 3s, and were starting to get faults. And there's only really 3 specific faults. Some of them tend to sort of happen when the deck's not been used for a long time, and there was lots of people getting the deck out of the loft and trying to use it, and it was running slow or it was doing weird stuff. So I produced these 3 videos because a lot of these faults are very simple to fix, but very difficult to describe over the telephone. So I created the video so I could just point people in that direction, say, go and listen to this, watch this video. Either fix it yourself, or then if once we've diagnosed what it is, just bring it into me and I'll sort it for you. And it worked really well. I mean, it worked so well that I've decided to keep the videos going. Hence the channel. Really, it has sort of mushroomed from there. Really, looking back at them, they do seem quite amateurish now. I mean, even more than amateurish than I am now, really, which is really saying something. But they were filmed on a mobile phone, and there's no microphone, so the speech is very difficult to pick up in places. So what I thought to do is kind of an update version. I don't think I'm going to do the individual faults as such, but well, if I just sort of talk through, I've got a turntable in for service. What I thought I would do is talk through the potential faults as we're looking at it. It's coming for service. It has actually got a fault with the speed. So yeah, we can just sort of go through and diagnose as we go. What I'm going to do actually is on the website, I'm going to create a kit of parts, so like a service kit. I mean, this applies to decks sort of from about 74.5 through to early 90s, well, roughly 1990 or possibly early 90s. And I'll sort of describe as I go what to look out for to see if your deck is sort of compatible with a kit of parts, really. So anyway, I'll turn the camera around, we'll have a look at the deck that's come in. A customer called Jean, who's left her Planar 3 with me, very trustingly. And so we're going to get that sorted out for her. Yeah, I'll turn the camera around, let's have a look. All right, so here we go. It's a Rega Planar 3. I'm taking a wild guess that this is about 85, 86 model. It's got the OB300 tone arm, which was introduced in about 83. Previous to this, they had the silver S-shape R200. These are the most repairable and sort of fixable decks, really. The early ones, the R200, I've said this before, the R200 tone arm isn't repairable nowadays and the parts aren't available. I do have lots of second-hand parts for R200, so if you need anything, let me know. But yeah, the R200 wasn't made by Rega, whereas the R300 is, and you can still get these repaired. Very rare to have faults with the tone arm, to be honest, unless they've been modified by people. But straight from the factory tone arms are very reliable. They don't really have any issues. So yeah, the first thing I tend to do is pretty much nothing at all. What I usually will do is put on, I'll try and get it from here, put the strobe on it and just see what it's doing before I actually start touching anything. Now with the strobe, what it should do, generally with the Rega, if it's in good shape, when you press the on switch, you should come up to speed, which means this outer band here, which is the sort of 50 Hertz 33 line, should freeze frame within about 4 seconds. Is a good startup time on a Rega. Usually when it's sort of freeze frame, it doesn't totally freeze frame. With Regas, they tend to run around a little bit like this. They tend to be slightly over speed, which is similar with, I had an Ariston in the other day, and early Sondex, things like that. They all do that. They all have a similar motor that's a frequency lock to the mains. It's what do you call it? Synchronous motors, and they all seem to have that sort of characteristic, really. So we're plugged in. So let's start up and see what happens. You can see straight away it's struggling. I think Jean was saying that this will actually sometimes run backwards. Now, running backwards suggests a capacitor. Starting up slow like this is quite often can be the belt. Sometimes it can be that the pulleys, well, quite regularly actually, it can be a detached pulley, which I'll describe in a sec. You can see it's just started to try to freeze frame it now, but we're probably running at about 23, 24 RPM. Because it should be going the other way, it should be doing this. If you can actually see it trying to freeze frame that. It's not, whether the camera will pick that up, I'm not too sure. I don't think this is ever going to get to speed, to be honest, looking at watching it. Or the other thing it can be is that the ball bearing in the bottom of the bearing housing, if somebody's quite often used to get, if somebody moved house and disassembled the turntable, and then when they put it back together again, it wouldn't run up to speed. And it was because they'd taken the subplatter out, taken the platter off the subplatter out and lost the ball bearing, which is very easy to do, actually. They can sort of pop out with air pressure sometimes. So we'll check the ball bearings in there, because this sort of running at a steady, slow speed like this seems a little bit like a ball bearing thing. But yeah, so yeah, let's start taking her apart and just see where we go. Okay, so what I've done, I've literally just taken the felt mat off to try and work out why it's not running up to speed. The first thing to check, and the reason I've left the platter on is because what we want to do is leave the pulley loaded when it's trying to drive. So if you turn, I don't know if you'll be able to see this on camera actually, but what's happening there is the pulley is turning faster than the belt is. So that suggests the belt is at issue, or the ball bearing isn't actually in the bottom of the bearing housing. Interestingly, what's going on here is, I don't know if you can see that the actual belt is resonating, which suggests that the pulley itself isn't consistently turning. So we could have two different faults here. Yeah, it really is vibrating then, actually. So just to run through the potential problems with this then. Straightforward, slow running, not getting up to speed, can be lost ball bearing, can be a belt that's slipping. It can also be detached pulley, because when I was checking for which is going faster, the pulley or the belt or whatever, sometimes you'll find that the pulley is gripping the belt perfectly, but it just doesn't get up to speed. And when that's the case, it's the actual little pulley there, which I'll just show that in a bit more detail without the glass platter on. Excellent. No way to put it down. The way to check for detached pulley, and this is probably the most common fault on early Regas that haven't been used for a while. The pulley itself should move on its suspension. People get a bit worried about this, but it's supposed to be suspended. It's supposed to have quite a bit of movement there. What it shouldn't do is, if you put two fingers there and pull, it shouldn't come off. And this one is really firmly attached, so sort of pulling it like that, it should. If it's got a detached pulley, it would just come away. And what happens in that situation is that the motor turns faster, and the spindle slips within the pulley. So it doesn't get up to speed because it's not driving the pulley up to speed. The cue for that is just a little spot of glue on the spindle and put the pulley back on. As I've said in the original video I did on this, I wouldn't tend to use super glue. I'd use a slow set glue, push the pulley all the way on, and then leave it to set overnight. If you're a bit braver, once you've got the deck disassembled and unplugged, if you wanted to use super glue, use a very, very tiny amount on the top of the spindle. Very, very tiny amount, because if any of that gets into the motor, it'll ruin the motor. But what you need to do is have the base of the deck off and support the motor underneath, because otherwise when you press it down, it can move away. And that little delay in time before it actually manages to get pushed down, it can set too high. And once it's set, you'll never get it off again. So you need to be able to get with super glue, be really quick with it, so that you don't have any disasters. So no problem here with pulley, that's firmly attached. That's one of the major things for slow running. The belt is possibly a bit suspect, but we'll come back to the belt, because it is actually quite unusual for the belt to cause slow running, to be honest. The other thing to do now is to have a look at the bottom of the bearing housing. I should take that out slowly. I'll have a look at the bottom for any wear. I should just take the oil off the bottom there. This actually looks in quite good order, you know. Doesn't appear to be a particular. There's a slightest of wear points on but right in the centre of the spindle, sometimes you get a little wear mark. This has got a slight scoring of the bottom of the bearing, which is pretty good, really, considering this is possibly getting on for 40 years old. I mean, I've had aftermarket hub. I'm not going on about this, but I've had aftermarket hubs. These sort of expensive things, things you can get on eBay and things you can sort of get online. after 6 months, and they've got a big hole bored in them from the ball bearing. Next thing is to have a look down the bottom of the bearing. Now, can we see with the camera? This is a good question. So you look down there with the light. What I'll do is just get my phone and see if I can see. I'll just stop the camera a second. I'll just have a look at that. Right, let's see if I can do this with my antiquated old mobile phone. See if I can actually see a ball bearing down there. Whether you'll be able to see that on the camera, I don't know. Probably not. But you can just see it at the bottom of the housing. So reflecting back at you. So that's good. So it's looking like potentially belt, but I have another suspicion. The vibrating of the belt kind of suggests that the drive capacitor has gone, the phase capacitor underneath. What I'm going to do is I'll turn the deck over. We'll have a look underneath, and I'll sort of point out how to spot a sort of failing phase capacitor. Now, before I do that, just a quick tip. What I tend to do, because you need to turn the turntable right over, I always put a belt across. This is like just an old Rega belt, just to hold the subplotter down. I mean, you could take this out to turn it upside down, but then you'd have to take out the ball bearing, and then you might get oil everywhere. So I tend to just leave that in, and it just keeps everything nice and clean and in place, and we can address the oil and everything later on. So for now, let's put the belt over it, and I'll turn over and we'll have a look underneath. Right, so we're upside down on the jig, and this is where the jigs come in really handy, really, because it's actually quite difficult to work on these decks upside down. And I would tend to say always work on them with the lid off, but be really careful of your stylus and really careful of your tone arm when you're working on them upside down, and also the potential to lose the ball bearing, things like that. First thing to always check before you take the base cover off, just make sure it's unplugged. So actually, this is the plug for it here in my hand. It's not in the wall. It's not got any voltage going through it. So just to be on the safe side, because under this cover is full mains voltage, so you don't really want to. Don't want to be touching that. First screw. The second screw you can just slacken off. You don't need to take it out. We can just slide that away. I'm not actually watching when I'm filming here, so hopefully I'm actually pointing in the right direction. Just making sure I'm not losing any of the screws. So inside we've got little circuit board, motor. At this point we can actually have a look at how old the deck is, because there's a little number on there, which you can see 3383, which means week 33, 1983. That's the age of the motor. Now, around this sort of time, Rega were on a big waiting list. There was, they were churning out turntables, but the demand was even greater. So none of the parts would be sitting on the shelf for very long. So that is actually quite a good indication of how old the decks are, because I've had sort of confirmation from sort of original receipts and things on these, and it's usually within a couple of months at the most, really. So that's quite a good. So yeah, 1983. So it's nearly 40 years old. On the board, you've only got two components. There's a resistor and the phase capacitor. Now, usually these will, and this one is as well. I'm pretty convinced now this is actually what's causing the speed issue. Little capacitor, they see it's all got cracks down the side of it, and as these get older, they start to expand. And this is what this is doing. All the outer casing is cracking and deforming. And what it's doing, it isn't basically doing its job properly, because it's not. It's not sort of keeping the sort of one side of the waveform out of the signal. It's letting sort of the wrong side of the waveform through to the motor, and the motor is turning and then stopping, trying to go backwards and turning forwards. And Jean actually said occasionally it'll run backwards, and that is usually as soon as somebody says that, it's definitely the capacitor. I mean, basically just for the video, I've kind of gone through all the other possibilities, but this we kind of knew that it was this anyway, just from the original description. Sometimes the deck will run fine for about 20 minutes, and then it'll start to fall over, and then the deck will slow down and speed up, and then sometimes stop and run backwards and things. But this one, I think, is further gone than that. It's actually affecting it right from cold, which is quite unusual, to be honest. So as part of the service, I always change this. anyway, because they do seem to have a finite life of sort of 30 years-ish. So this is 40 years old, so it's done quite well. These components, actually, you find them in all sorts of things. I had an old Tandy computer, which I resurrected out of the loft, and all the little reefer caps all failed. They all had to be replaced. And these are like a dropper resistor there, these get quite hot, so just don't be surprised if when it's been plugged in for a while and you put your finger on that, it's stinking hot. That's dropping the voltage down to 110, so it's all the energy it dissipates comes off as heat, so they run quite hot. If the deck was completely dead, if you came to it and it just didn't work, 9 times out of 10 it's that resistor's failed. If it hasn't failed, I wouldn't bother replacing it. I'm not going to put them into the repair kit, I don't think, or the service kit, because there's no point changing these unless it has actually physically failed, and it is really unusual for these to go. The other possibility is occasionally the switches go, but that's really rare. It is really rare for the switches to fail, so I can't think of more than a couple in all the years I've been doing Rega, which is 40 years really. So yeah, capacitor, so that needs changing. So yeah, let's do that. I'll set the camera up, and you can watch me attempt to solder and film at the same time, which will be interesting. Right, so let's see how this goes. This could be a disaster. I've got the camera balanced. Yeah, let's see. Basically, this little board's just holding with one single screw. So just take out the screw out, put that safe. That means you can now, again, double checking that you are unplugged, because this is where all the mains is. You can then pull this board sort of upside down. Now you wonder why I'm not showing on this video, because I'm not going to show on this video how to change the suspension belt here. I wouldn't change the suspension belt on these decks unless it's broken. It's one of the most difficult jobs to do on these decks, and there's potential to sort of, because they use little plastic screws to hold the whole assembly in, which is part of the isolation. It's not got metal screws for a reason, but the plastic screws will strip. I mean, pretty much every time they will strip. So unless it's failed, I wouldn't change it, because the benefit of a new belt is negligible, really. The old suspension belts, it's there to isolate it, and it does it whether it's stretched a little bit or not. I wouldn't worry too much, and they're very difficult to realign as well. You'll tighten it up and put it on, and the motor will be at the wrong angle, and the belt will ride, and this sort of thing. So, like I say, you eventually will screw and take the heads off the screws, or just completely strip them. So just don't do it, really. I might do a video on how to do that, but for people who need to. But that's at some time in the future. I'll do that. Anyway, back to the board. So. Put it upside down. Need to do is desolder the old cat, which is that one and that one. Get my old trusty old soldering iron out. See if we can. What I tend to do is grip the component and pull slightly on it, and then just desolder that's come out, and try not to touch any of the wires. So that's the capacitor out. What we want to do is get the new capacitor, which I had for a moment and it's gone. Can you see that there? So look. No, you can't. Right there. Oh, you can see that. So what we need to do with this, because that's how they come, I need to copy the angle of the legs. So across like that. Just measure it against, so I need to turn about there. And a turn about there. Let's see where we're up to. Totally wrong. Need to open that one out a little bit more. Yeah, that's got it. So I tend to leave the legs long, actually, but you can either cut these down initially, or, like I say, leave them long. Hopefully there's the solder sort of removed from there, but if not, Yeah, I might need to just desolder that a little bit. See if it'll tighten. Of course not. Give me desolderer. I'll be able to push it through, and then it makes the job a bit easier. Right, so I was very wary of getting those wires hot. That's why you need about 4 hands really. Desolder. Just takes away excess solder. And people are probably saying, why aren't you using desoldering? What do you call it? It's like a, I can't remember the name of it now. There's a sort of, it looks like a woven cable that you can use it. And I have used that in the past actually, but I tend to prefer the little solder sucker. Okay, so let's push that through. Where are we? Make sure it's pushed down as far as it will go. I tend to just give them a little bend out to stop it moving now. Back in position. You don't get a lot of room to manoeuvre with this. So what I might do is just put those under there just to stop it going anywhere. No, that's it. Oh, what I do now at this point is some solder. So it's quite useful. I'm actually doing this without glasses, which is it's just a complete blur. Why am I doing it like this? Yeah, okay. Oh. Looks good. A bit more. Probably fine actually, that just. It's good. Just give that a sec to cool down a bit. Cut the excess. Okay, so that's one replaced capacitor. Just need to put that board back in. And before we go any further, what we'll do is just test that and just see if that's cured the slow start. Well, the slow start and refusal to get up to speed actually, which is quite a bad one actually. That don't usually have as much effect on the cold start as that. So that's one capacitor finished with. What I will do is put the cover back on because we shouldn't need to go back in there now. So just push across. And I don't like working on live decks when the base is off because I tend to forget that the base is open. Never managed to electrocute myself, but I'm surprised I haven't. That's that. Okay, so stop camera and I'll turn over and let's do a test. Right, so put everything back together again. Plugged in. This is I've not actually seen whether this has fixed it myself actually. So let's see if it's any better. So on. That's definitely reacting faster. And it's up to speed. And like I say, slightly. If you can see that, slightly running round this way a bit, so it's slightly showing fast. Which is about right. So it's running about 33.5 probably, something like that. So that basically that should be fine now. It should just work. But what I'm going to do is do the full service anyway because it's always worth. I mean, it should, like I say, it should be a 4-second start. That isn't. I didn't time it actually. What is it? I was just time this. It's about 7 seconds. So I would say the belt's slightly warm, but not too bad actually. It seems to A bit of a slip. Or it may not, actually it may not be the belt, it might just be the fact it needs servicing, which this is the bit I'm going to do next. It's a case of just cleaning everything now, just degreasing everything, which just takes a bit of time. It just takes a bit of time. Okay, so I'll stop the camera now and we'll take apart again and do the rest of the service. Right, for servicing, what I tend to do is just clean everything down, then sort of degrease things like pulleys or whatever else. But the first thing to do is to get rid of any sort of dust on here, because all these decks have dust in sort of hidden places. So just sort of go around it and sort all that out. First thing to do is to take off the belt, take the subplatter out very carefully. Only do this very slowly. If you go too quickly, this is actually a time when you can lose the ball bearing out, because if you go really quickly, the air pressure can actually force the ball bearing out on sort of a it can disappear over your shoulder without it actually seeing it. So I'll put that out of the way. I'll clean that up later on. And what I'll do now is just put something over the. Oh, actually, no. What I'll do first, I'll just stop the camera a sec. Because what I'll do is turn the deck over and get the ball bearing out. Which should I show that? Yeah, I'll show doing that. I guess but I'll turn the deck over first, then you can just see that. Okay, so I've turned it upside down. Normally, they don't. The ball bearing is quite difficult to get out. Realising I didn't have enough hands to do this, I've put a little catcher underneath, so if the bearing fell out, it'd fall into there. It actually fell out straight away, so I managed to catch it in there. If you have any sort of problem when it's upside, the deck's upside down, what I tend to do is get a screwdriver and just tap the bottom of the bearing housing like that until you. If you have one hand doing that and the other hand underneath ready to catch it, sometimes just a couple of firm taps like that and it'll come out. So yeah, so that didn't go quite as planned, but it's sort of shown the principle. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over again. This is getting really complicated. Right, so that's the subplatter out. What I tend to do is just put a bit of tape just over, really just to stop anything in the room sort of falling in there, or any dust or any debris from anywhere. Because what I want to do now is I just want to clean around the top of the deck. And firstly, what I tend to do is just get an ordinary 1-inch paintbrush, probably, 1.5-inch paintbrush. Make sure the clips are on, and I just go around all the base of everything there. There's loads of dust sort of accumulates in these areas. Just give it a really good dusting around. And the other thing you can do if you want to be really sort of finicky about it is to just unfasten the bolt on the bottom of the arm, take the arm off, and then clean it, right across. But you don't really need to. A brush will get into most of the little corners. I tend to just check if there's any grease marks on here, because then you can sort of, get a bit of degrease trying to just clean. This is actually really clean condition. Actually, it's been sort of nicely looked after. So next thing will be just to clean the top. I should have just continued across the top. I forgot to do that because I'm trying to film at the same time. Just to take the excess bits of dust off, just being careful around the motor. And where the hinges go tend to accumulate quite a bit. Okay. So what I'll do now, I'll just go and get my magical cleaning solution that I always use, and just clean the top of the deck properly. And yeah, won't miss that. So what I've got here is just, after years and years of trying different sorts of things to clean Rega turntables with, the best seems to be, whether it's available in any other countries, Mr. Muscle for cleaning windows. It's just basically a degreasing detergent, and it's quite mild. It doesn't really do it. It does work really well. And I don't use ordinary dusters. I use just basically kitchen roll, and just the first time round, what I tend to do is wet everything a little bit and then just dab it around with a kitchen towel, which will lift any sort of grit or anything else, anything that's left after the brush. The brush should get rid of most of it, but just dab around before you start doing a sort of circular motion or anything like that to clean it. So what I'll do, I don't put an awful lot on, just like I said, making sure we're covered there. And that's switched off. Can I switch it on with one hand? Yes, I can. Just go around, just do the odd little bits like that. Don't worry too much about it touching the pulley. I wouldn't squirt around the motor too much, but it will splash out a little bit. I don't tend to do too much around the arm, just a little touch. My camera technique is awful because I'm not really watching what I'm doing. And like I said, I just get trying to do this with one hand. It's a disaster. Trying to do kitchen roll with one hand. Oh, down here. This is going to mess up the microphone. Right. Okay, I'm back. What a mad idea this was. So I just tend to dab it around at first, just to pick up any sort of loose bits of grit or dust, sort of dust, because it can. I mean, to be honest, the actual finish of all these early Regas is very robust. It doesn't really tend to scratch. Just being careful of your stylus here, I guess. Well, this is being changed actually. Jim wants another cartridge on, so it doesn't really matter what happens to the old one, but it'd be quite good for it to be able to keep it as a backup. Yeah, I think that's all right actually. I'm just going to tend to look at the corners quite a bit there, because they tend to get quite grimy on the corners. On that. So what I'll do now, I think that's all dabbed in quite well. It's sort of lifted onto here. Any sort of loose stuff, I can actually get on and give it a bit more of a proper rub. So what I'll do, I'll do that off camera. Actually, the heat in here is starting to dry already, so I might have to just squirt a bit more onto it. So yeah, I'll be back in a second. Okay, so that's cleaned up really well actually. It just gets rid of a bit of the sort of finger grease that you always get on turntables, and it just brings that off, and it's, just makes them look a little bit more sort of clean and tidy really. So now we can take this off the main bearing, because what we're going to do now is clean the bearing. And what I tend to do with that is I've got a little, if you can see that there, I've got a little tray with some isopropyl alcohol in it and some cotton buds. Just load up your cotton bud. What you want to do is keep cleaning the bottom of the bearing. I mean, I've tried all sorts of different ways of doing this. The one thing you have to be careful of is that you don't leave any debris in there. You can be quite, you can be quite sort of rough with it really. You can sort of, swirl it around quite a bit. Well, rough within reason anyway. So you want to try and get into all the corners. You can see there's quite a bit of oil on there. So let's reverse it round, get a bit more on there. Usually you get, it's like 3 or 4 cotton buds 3 or 4 ends of cotton buds before it starts to come clean. And funnily enough, this is coming clean quite quickly. This one, I think it may have had replacement oil in it at some point. This. But I didn't check. I usually check to make sure it's got the right oil in. What you have to be very wary of with Regas is that they do, there's a very specific type of oil that works best with them, because it's quite a thick oil, and it's part of the way the whole sort of thing works. It's, I mean, people put machine oils in them and all sorts of things, and it does make the bearing run freer, or apparently seems to make it run freer, but then it loses the damping effect of the thicker oil, so the actual speed consistency isn't as good. So it is a thick oil for a reason. It's basically car gearbox oil. It's not anything high spec or anything like that really, but it's I sell it in little bottles. That's the correct stuff, and I do sell that on the website. £8 a bottle. To be fair, that sounds like an awful lot of money for a bit of gearbox oil, but it's the bottles cost me a bit. I can't think how much the bottles are actually, but it's £4 to post them, plus the oil, plus the jiffy bag, plus everything else. And at £8, I'm just about making a profit on it. So if it seems a bit expensive, that's partly why I want to do the kits, because I can sort of lose all that postage then. If you're having a few things in a kit, then it makes it a lot more sort of affordable to do really. That's what we're looking at now. Oh, it's still showing a bit actually, still bringing oil out. Perhaps it wasn't as clean as I thought it was. Actually, that's clean now, I think. Yeah, looking down there, it looks really good. And the other thing, obviously, is that we'll do the spindle. And what I'll do is I'll just set up the camera for that. What is that? Before I clean the spindle, what I'll do actually, I'll just put the oil in. Now, the thing with the Rega bearing is it doesn't need very much oil at all. It's 3 drops, I think, 2 to 3 drops. What I tend to do is trying to get a drop on the end. 1, 2, and then let the other one just on the side there, just let the other one just run down the side. So which will then coat the spindle as it goes in. And then what we'll do is get the ball bearing, which I have actually cleaned. I did it off camera. I did it and then realised I should have done it in film. But clean the ball bearing, and you just drop that in behind. And I'll just get one of the cotton buds, just a bit of excess there, just so it's not going to migrate anywhere. Just missed a little bit. But then running it down the side, you do tend to miss a little bit, so just keep that clean. Now, clean the spindle. Probably doing this in the wrong order. You should probably clean everything first, but so we need to clean this part of the spindle. So I'll do that again. Do the same with cotton buds. If there's any oil come up onto here, which sometimes if people use the wrong oil, I didn't really go into detail about that actually, but it is a thing. People using the wrong oils on these, it does tend to migrate. Like sewing machine oils and things like that cause all sorts of havoc, because what it tends to do is run up the inside of the spindle and onto here, and it actually gets into the resin of the subplatter and starts to rot it. So I've had actually situations where common thing is that this will come off because it's a separate piece, but everything around it expands and pushes it off, and then you can't get the back on again. So keep to the right oils as well. Apart from the fact, like I say, it needs to have the right sort of damping in the bearing. It also needs to not migrate anywhere and cause havoc. So I always talk about this, but this is a really good part, and I mean people replace these with sort of aftermarket things. Apart from the fact, looking at this now, I can't actually see anywhere at all on the end of this. There isn't even a slightest of dimples from the ball bearing. And like I just said, I'm going to re-emphasise this because it actually makes me a bit cross really. There's lots of parts which people online say are so much better than that rubbish plastic part that Rega make. This is 40 years old. You can barely tell it's ever been used. Some of these aftermarket things, 6 months and they've got massive wear to the spindle here. And it affects the sound badly because it's basically creating friction. So it's nice and clean. Just have a look around, make sure there's no fur or anything off the cotton bud, and just checking down the bearing. Seems I've checked that with the light before and it seems okay, but the oil seems to have dropped to the bottom now. So right, so what we should be able to do now, put the subplatter on. Now don't be worried that this doesn't go down. A good bearing should do that. It's air locking because it's slowly letting the air through. You just have to sort of be patient with it. Sometimes on the really new decks, I mean, there will be a little bit of wear with this, but it's actually saying that. It's still, yeah. You kind of need to let it do its own thing, really. If, like this one, if you've got a bearing which is in really good condition like this is, what I tend to do is put the platter on and just leave it for a bit and let it just settle. Give it a spin and it'll just let the air out. So what I'll do, I'll let that settle and then we'll come back to it. There's quite a bit more cleaning to do yet, so yeah, I might have a coffee now and just come back to it in a sec. Okay, we're back to it. This has actually taken nearly a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, I think, to drop. That's a sign of a very good bearing actually. There's pretty much zero wear, like I say, after nearly 40 years. Next job, so what we've done so far there is we've cleaned out the bearing, cleaned the ball bearing both with isopropyl, re-oil the bearing, 3 drops of oil, 2 into the bottom of the bearing, 1 to run down the side, turn the thing and let it drop, put a platter on to help it drop and spun it up occasionally, and I just kept coming back to it and spinning it and letting it until eventually it had settled. Next job now is, so we've done the inner workings of the bearing. You need to now look at the outside of the platter, subplatter and the pulley. So we need to plug back in again. Actually, we are plugged back in again. Run the motor. Get through an awful lot of cotton cotton bud doing this. So I need to load up the cotton bud again. And this seems to be the best way to do this, is to switch the motor on and just let the pulley run against the cotton bud. You get a bit of a little howling sound from it as it sort of grips. If you take that away, you can sort of see it's discoloured the end of the cotton bud already. So just do that for a while, and just switch ends. See if we get another. Basically just keep doing this until the discoloration goes. What it is build up of dirt from the belt. Actually, it's rubber actually melted onto the, well, sort of worn onto the pulley surface, and obviously it makes the pulley uneven. It's still coming. Makes the pulley uneven enough. It affects speed stability a little bit, very, very fractionally, but it does affect it. So it's quite important to keep that surface clean. So we're just doing the 33 pulley at the moment. Usually the 33 one is the worst, for obvious reasons. That's clean. So that's removed all the rubber and sort of detritus off of that. Let's do it on the 45. Yeah, it's pulled a bit of the thing off there. It's not good. Just use that as well, because that's what I used before. There might be a little bit of a nick on the outside of the pulley that's just catching the fibres a bit. It's actually clean, that. I don't think that's really ever been used for 45s, or if it has, not very often. And also, it's starting to look like it's getting a bit obsessional, but it does seem to help. What I tend to do is put that on and just run around, because you do seem to get a certain amount of burnt on rubber onto the actual rim of the subplatter as well. You can see that. Look how mucky that is. So just turn that around and keep going. If it's really bad, I'd actually take this out and use sort of first time round, I'd do it with sort of kitchen towel and alcohol, and just keep rubbing around until it comes clean, and then do the cotton buds. Yeah, it's getting cleaner. Let's just get another load on the. Still coming. You can hear it's getting cleaner because it's starting to vibrate. Nearly gone. Just one more. Just make sure you cover the full surface of it, because the belt runs at different levels on the different speeds. So it tends to be quite low for 45 and in the middle for 33. Yeah, that's pretty much clean, that, actually, now. I might just give it another run round, just because that's what I'm like. Yeah. Okay, so that's all the surface is clean. Now what I tend to do, I mean, I can't remember whether Jean said she'd had a new belt on this. This feels like quite a recent belt, to be honest. Sort of feel, what I tend to do with this, I'll just stop the camera a second, I'll just reposition it. Okay, for the belt, what I tend to do, I'll get a piece of kitchen towel again and fold it like this. So I've got that, and I'll just dip the end of this into the alcohol, just let it soak in quite a bit, and then just put that through the belt. What you don't want to do is put too much pressure on this. You want to pull it through, but you don't want it to be resisting too much, because you don't want to stretch the belt. Just pull it through, and quite quickly you'll see there's usually quite a lot comes off the belt. And never totally get rid of that with the belt, because I think because it's rubber, you start to take the surface of the belt off if you're not careful. So you just until it's more consistently showing on there really, but usually the first few runs through, they're usually really, really dirty. Yeah, just move it along a bit. Probably the last run will do this. You can actually feel it with your fingers that it's cleaner. Yeah, that's quite good actually. Okay, so the belt's sorted. Obviously make sure you've washed your hands thoroughly before you handle any of these things. Just refit the belt. Yeah, that feels like a good belt actually, that. Usually a check for a good belt is if you just move backwards and forwards like this, there shouldn't be any slippage of the belt on the pulley. It should be able to drive the motor. And it's actually gripping really well. You can see how it's sort of bowing out either side like that. That's from gripping really. So I'd say the belt's in good shape, to be honest. But we'll time it in a bit and just to confirm that. But I reckon we're probably going to get easily 5 or 6 second startup on this, which is sort of within what you'd expect really. 4 is when everything's absolutely so, but they vary a little bit. Okay, so I'll start putting everything back together again. Okay, so I've just cleaned the platter in the same way. Trust your Mr. Muscle, and a bit of kitchen towel, and they're always, obviously because it is a glass cleaner, they always come up really well. This is a slightly scarier one, but it's something that I've discovered in recent years is quite effective. Mats, the way to rejuvenate a mat, because they always get quite a bit of dust in them. I've got my favourite doorpost here. Just whack it against the doorpost, and it just sort of turning as you go. I can't do this without watching the camera at the same time. And it just knocks. It's like sort of how they always used to hit rugs to get the dust out of them. So I'll do that off camera a bit because I need to be a bit more vigorous than that really. But it's actually, to be honest, actually that's taking most of the dust out of it. But I'll give it another go in a sec. But yeah, so we're kind of done from that point of view. Obviously I'll do the lid as well. Lids, I tend to, again, clean with Mr. Muscle. You must, with a lid, go around dabbing a lot. I tend to put a lot more of the cleaning fluid on it and dab it a lot more, because that they can really show scratches if you don't get it right. So you have to remove all the traces of dust before you actually sort of give it a good polish. If there's lots of fine scratches on there that you're trying to get rid of, I've used a thing called Lamp Doctor, which is basically, well, there's probably loads of things like this. It's a very mild, a bit like T-cut for polishing cars. It's for doing headlights, like plastic headlights, and it doesn't take deep scratches out, but that will take sort of your fine polishing scratches out quite well. I'm not going to do that now because I think this lid's in quite good shape, but I will clean it with Mr. Muscle and everything just to get finger marks out. So let's just give it another test and see what we're like for startup. Let's get me pictures off. I don't know. I've no idea what this is going to look like afterwards because I'm not really pointing the camera in the right direction half the time. Right, so we've got the strobe back on again. So everything's been cleaned now, so it should, in theory, be slightly better. Certainly more consistency and speed. It's 5 seconds. So we're up to speed. So just slightly fast like they always are. But yeah, about a 5 second startup. So the belt's fine. Bearings in really good shape, really good shape. Yeah, it's a good deck actually, 1983. Well, about halfway through 1983. Now the cartridge is going to be changed on this. I'm just waiting for it to come back on Rega because the Elise is back, and the preferred cartridge for this was an Elise, so I'm just waiting for it to come back from Rega. I'm not going to show fitting that or anything on this video. I think this is basically just the deck service. Oh, there's one thing I've forgotten to show actually, which I need to do. What sometimes happens with, I'll just stop the motor, and I wouldn't be surprised if this one isn't doing the same, is when you're queuing, quite often there's a bit of sort of drift. They'll sort of drift back on their own like that, and they should be quite rigid. Now the way to cure that is, I'll just set the camera up actually, let me set. I'm just going to show how to do this, because this is something that crops up on a lot of these forums and Facebook pages or whatever, and people say, oh, when I lower the tone arm, it drifts off to the side. This is it's slightly doing it. It's not actually not doing it very much, this one. And usually the answer on forums and, like I say, all these sort of advice things is, well, that's your anti-skate because it's skating across, so that's the anti-skate, which is this little adjuster down here. It's nothing to do with that at all. What it's to do with is a little finger lift here. This arm moves this little lifter up and down, and it's got a little rubber grip on it. And when they get older, the rubber on there starts to denature, and it gets like a hard shell on it. So it loses grip, so it's lifting the tone arm, but because there is a certain amount of sideways force with these tone arms that's inherent in the design, they're supposed to do that, it'll drift because it's not being gripped properly. The way to stop it is to, it's the old isopropyl alcohol and a cotton bud job again, but basically that little rubber there, if you just, there's two ways of doing it. This is quite effective. If you're worried about putting isopropyl onto the rubber, you can just do it with your finger, just scratch it with your fingernail, but sometimes you can actually pull the rubber part out if you're not careful. So I tend to do it like this nowadays, just really rub hard with that. And it just helps, just takes the surface grease and the sort of top surface of the rubber off. Just give it a bit of a dry on the other side as well. And you can usually tell straight away when you move the arm across that it's got a real, see how it's sort of much more, stops dead when you push it across now. Simple thing, but there's so much misinformation about that, like a lot of these forums, and it's a shame really, because there should be a sort of a place of good advice really. But yeah, that particular one, such a simple thing, but it's, yeah, the dreaded anti-skate, that's all they want to talk about on some of these forums. Anyway, so that's all done. Obviously, I'll check the turn arms all done. I've done a video on setting these arms up, if you want to sort of search that one out. Yeah, so hopefully that was helpful. Just a couple of extra notes on it. If you open the bottom of the deck up and there's either two capacitors or a single green capacitor in there, which is like a very rectangular green capacitor, those don't tend to fail. So the little service kits, get the one without the capacitors in it because they don't tend to go. I tend to replace them with, the original reefer type, but just for originality's sake, really. But like I say, in the last 40 years, so it's not going to be a great problem. What else was I going to say? Yeah, don't forget to give me a like and a subscribe, and thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in a future video. Thank you very much.